welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. On today's episode, we're going to be breaking down the top 16 of Punt cEDH, the newest platinum event by TopDeck.gg, the lovely company that's brought to you many events throughout the year, and the company that owns Command Tower, the software that mostly every cEDH event is using nowadays. We are going to be talking about Punt cEDH, the third iteration of the same tournament, and we're going to be talking about our decks that did well today. We're going to be actually talking about one extra deck apart from the top 16 because one of our folks who had a very solid winning record did not make the top 16, but their deck was super spicy and I really want to talk about it. So we're talking about 17 decks today because I love throwing some cool stuff out there. If you enjoy videos like this, please make sure to hit that like button and that subscribe button as they help out the channel a ton and they are absolutely free to do. If you're interested in checking out the channel and helping us in a more lucrative way, there's patreon.com/comedianmtg, which helps basically keep this going. I'm going to be putting out a lot of content over the next few weeks between a lot of coverage about Laws of Thunder Junction and some tournaments and things like that that are all coming up. So it's gonna be some busy weeks. I'm actually gonna be traveling a bunch to help Scribe Baby shoot and do a bunch of crazy stuff. So if you wanna help support all of this stuff that we keep going, if you like all the content out there, if you like my stuff here, as well as the Mind Sculptors, any of those things, feel free to check out patreon.com/comedianmtg. The support goes a long way to making sure this can keep going and growing. But without any further ado, let's cover our top 16 and one more deck right now. So this list came in 23rd place. So for those who don't know, 16 points or 3 wins and 1 draw was able to get one person into our top 16, right? Our player here, you see one more extra loss because they lost top 16, right? But three wins, 1 draw was able to get one of our players in top 16. And then there were several other players who had 3-3-1, 3-3-1, 3-3-1, 3-3-1, all the way down to this placement here. All a bunch of people who had 3 wins, 1 draw. Only one of them was able to qualify for top 16 because when you have a large 7-round, 100+ person tournament, sometimes you do need some pretty good records to be able to qualify for these types of things. So one of the 3-3-1s was here, this David Walker with this Zergo Ojutai list, which is something I had recently heard about someone playing, but I did not expect to be seeing up at the top tables of this tournament. So this is Zergo and Ojutai, Dragon Farm by Dracomancer7. This is a super cool list. So basically, I believe Zergo and Ojutai is mostly used as just the value engine of this deck, right? Because you have a Flying Haste 4/4 in the command zone. It has hexproof as long as it enters the battlefield this turn, so that first connect from your commander is pretty much guaranteed. And then whenever one or more dragons you control deal combat damage to a player, look at the top 3 cards of their library, 1 into your hand, 1 in the rest of the bottom of your library. So basically, and this is, there's a lot of ways to actually trigger this card in this deck. We have things like Roaming Throne to get double triggers. Also Roaming Throne plus another dragon absolutely goes crazy. Sakashima the Imposter also doubles up Zergo and Ojutai, right? So if you have Zergo and Ojutai and then you Sakashima it, it actually gives you 4 of the triggers, right? So if you connect with these cards, you're able to literally just with the 2 dragon clones, look at the top 3 4 separate times and pick one of them. So look 12 cards and take 4 of them. It is obviously quite strong. Definitely some crazy spicy stuff in this list. There's Baron Dockside lines, but I'm not really sure because the commander itself doesn't necessarily pay off for infinite mana. There's no like Cloudstone Curio here either. But it seems like the main win condition of the deck is just Underworld Breach. Or I'm assuming probably Dragon Beats is also up there somewhere. But yeah, there's a lot of like high value dragons. As I mentioned, there's an infinite mana line without really any sort of payoff that I'm seeing. Dragons you control do combat damage, so it has to be through combat damage. There is Teferi Kitten line is also, I guess, another win condition in this deck, as you're able to bounce and play rocks, draw through your entire library, and set up some sort of loop. I'm assuming with Underworld Breach would probably be the easiest way. There is the Spellseeker line, unless I'm crazy. If we see Ephemerate here, no, there's, yeah, okay, so there's Ephemerate Spellseeker, for those who don't know. Ephemerate plus Spellseeker, as long as your deck is a Jeskai deck, is able to create a combination of spells that allow you to basically 1 card assemble an Underworld Breach line. So just resolving a Spellseeker in Jeskai can often get you this Underworld Breach line without much other resources developed into it. So that part's pretty cool too. But this is a super sick list and definitely not one I was expecting even slightly. This is super cool. I mean, you're seeing some like crazy value dragons in this deck, things like the Cavern Horde Dragon, Goldspan, Ferncrag, Cunning Instigator, which is definitely not one that I expected to see in a cEDH pod. So you're like goading your opponents, you're able to get some card draw off of that, you have your commander drawing off of other cards. This deck is just super unique and super cool. At the end of the day, there's a lot of like the classic Jeskai Breach stuff, but you know, also this entirely cool separate other plan, which is pretty sweet. We have our 16th place deck here with Malcolm's Grixis Pals. Now this was the only 16 pointer to make the top 16 with this list, so 3 wins, 1 draw for our opponent, or for our player here during this list, not our opponent. We have a pretty classic Malcolm Vile Smasher list. It's definitely the sort of like, well, I say pretty classic, but it's kind of interesting because it's sort of got that like hybrid play pattern to it, because it's got like the Necro stuff, it's got breach lines, it's got Necro with Born Upon a Wind, okay. It also has some of the hack effects, right? Things like Trickery Charm that allow you to turn certain cards, specifically Mayhem Devil, into a pirate so that you're able to actually combo off with Mayhem Devil and then changing its card type to pirate. But there's not any of the other ones here that do that, which is pretty interesting. It seems to be the only card that you can actually use the Trickery Charm on. I'm wondering how often that actually comes up as an alternate win condition. The rest of the deck is definitely a lot of these really solid value engines. We do have Niv Mizzet in here, which I'm assuming, oh, it's not even a thing with, usually it's a Magda inclusion for a lot of these decks, because you're able to then, you know, sack 5 treasures, which you make a ton of with Magda, to grab Niv Mizzet, but there's no Magda in the 99 of this deck, so I guess it's just like a value Niv. Well, but like Curiosity and Ophidian Eye are definitely in the deck too. Well, that's pretty fascinating. Interesting, okay. But there's Necroborn lines in this deck, there's classic Underworld Breach stuff, there's Historical Demonic Consultation lines, as I mentioned we have the hack, we have the classic Glenhorn combo. So definitely a lot of combos in this deck. This is a very combo heavy Malcolm Vile Smasher list with just like layering upon layering of a bunch of A plus Bs that sort of fit into this deck. That's pretty interesting. 24 lands, wow, so low. Yeah, this is a pretty quirky little Malcolm Vile Smasher list. I'm so curious what that Adnos curve is. And 1.39, so that's definitely on the higher end of things, definitely larger than things like Roxai and stuff like that. But yeah, this is a super interesting deck, and congrats on making top 16 with this wild pile here. We had JQ21 with Najeela PC3. This is a Najeela list here for Punt City, and let's see, it's definitely relying a lot on some of the older Najeela speed needs no translation sort of technique for this tournament. I say older version because we actually did have Memo come down from Germany to attend this tournament, and they actually did make this top 16. So we'll be talking about Memo's list as well, which is good because I believe Memo was on a bit of a tough streak and then was able to bounce back at this tournament. So it's pretty cool to see him come back and do well and perform as well. But we're talking about JQ here with his version of Najeela. We have Derevi lines here. We have the classic Salmon stuff. We have Grim Hireling, as in, you know, Derevi and Grim Hireling are both combos with Najeela. This is definitely the more ad nauseum focused version. We have things like Meme Bet, Culling Ritual. We have the Intuition Underworld Breach lines. We have ad nauseum lines. Very classic Najeela stuff. A little lower on the artifacts. Yeah, no, I feel like most Najeela lists look like this. Notice no One Ring in this version, so definitely keeping the Najeela plan a little bit more in mind. But yeah, this is a pretty standard like ad nos based Najeela list, and congrats on making top cut of this you know, very tough tournament. So we have a quarter of this top 16 on Blue Farm. Spoiler alert, none of them make the top 4, but you know, Blue Farm's still a deck very heavily represented in this metagame, and did pretty well in this tournament, making once again 4 of the top 16. So we have Blue Farm here. Some of the interesting choices right away, we see Delny as an inclusion in the 99, just able to double up mostly your like Bowmasters and your Docksides, occasionally triggering Archivist and Lotho and things of that nature, which is pretty sweet to see. I mean, I guess double Thoracle triggers technically can happen, but I feel like that's not the most common case with this deck. This one is on ad nauseum. I know some lists are experimenting without being ad nause. We do see some interesting stuff right away here with Curse Totem in the 99 and a 17 artifact Blue Farm list. And Blue Farm is sort of notoriously light on the artifacts. No Smothering Tithe in this version either. 27 lands, which is like lower, but not crazy low. We were on Angel's Grace in the 99 too, and Orum's Chant. So already some very interesting inclusions in this version of Blue Farm. I like the fact that there is Born Upon the Wind, but not overcommitting into those Necropotence lines, which I've been kind of underwhelmed by in Blue Farm, but I do think they're still pretty solid. We also have Trick Bind in the 99, which is obviously a very, very powerful card if your opponents are not ready for it, which is pretty sweet. So this is a very interaction heavy Blue Farm list, but also like bear heavy as well, which is kind of fascinating to see. It's definitely a unique take on Blue Farm, and definitely some spicy inclusions in this list, which is not always the case with Blue Farm. Sometimes it's a little copy and paste. So, you know, it's kind of cool to see. I mean, I didn't even mention that Deadly Rolk is also kind of a quirky inclusion here, right? So definitely a different take on Blue Farm, which I do thoroughly enjoy. I think it's like a really cool to see this like very competitive deck in the format get a few spicy choices and few attempts at mixing things up a little bit. So congrats to our pilot. We have Krark-Saka here with, you know, a lot of the classic Krark-Saka stuff. I feel like a lot of these Krark-Saka lists are definitely going up more towards the Niv Mizzet side of things. Most of the lists that have been performing lately, I've actually done like a recent deep dive into the Krark-Saka world when I was working with a client on it pretty recently. But a lot of the lists that have been doing well have been using this Niv lines. I know a lot of folks are really excited about just like Displacer Kitten in the deck because of its interaction with Dockside and really helping to up the storm count for the deck and like really make that game plan very viable. I really like the creature choices in this version as well. Yeah, for those who don't know, Krark-Saka is like the premier storm deck in the format as of right now, and it's good to see it doing well. I think, you know, for a while it was a very represented deck, and there was a lot of, you know, talk about how pilots that were not confident playing the list would be very negative to the match integrity. But we're seeing a pilot here make top 16 with this deck, and it's been some time since all of that nonsense happened, and definitely see some cool stuff in here. Like Mind's Desire is not always played in the list. It was really popular when the deck first came out, but like that's definitely in and out of a lot of popular lists. We have Brightstone Ritual, which I know many folks are high on and many folks are very, very low on. Sometimes, you know, when you have your double Krark-Saka, like it's very good, and then it has upside from there, right? Especially if you hit like Dockside or you clone your commander any more times, right? Other times it's just like 1 mana, refund you a red, right? So it's a little bit weird in that sense. But apart from that, not too many like absolutely insane inclusions, just a pretty solid Krark-Sakashima list, and glad to see them doing pretty well. Now I know Krark-Sakashima is a passion project for many folks, so if there's any particular pieces that y'all find interesting out there in the audience, definitely feel free to leave those in the comments down below. I never claim to be a Krark-Saka expert, as it's very antithetical to my style, but I do always appreciate the list and think it's super cool. I'll remind you here that we are co-sponsored this episode by Tales of Adventure Magic. If you want to get some amazing singles at really good prices, they are awesome. Go to toamagic.com. They also have a really cool in-person pickup. So if you are going to events like the Command Fest LA, Command Fest Dallas, any of those events, you can actually order online at toamagic.com and pick them up in person when they are there in store, ready at these events. So really cool options and availability. They have such a wide inventory, really solid store, and you can use code Comedian to get a discount off of your order. Speaking of Memo, as I mentioned, he was able to come out to this tournament and actually show up at this US tournament, which is pretty cool. I believe the TopDeck.gg folks flew him out, and we have him here playing this Najeela list. We have a very sweet Najeela list here with, as mentioned, Speedy and So's translation, Aggro Warriors, right? So it's kind of fun. We've been talking about this a little bit on the Mind Sculptors, that Najeela, to adapt to the current metagame, could use a little bit more of that aggro game plan. And here from the direct quote on the deck, it's called Aggro Warriors is a commander-centric aggro deck that preys on the mid-range meta. The list is designed to deploy an early Najeela and embrace the beatdown. By not casting many spells and the general emphasis on the combat phase, this list plays around cards like Flusterstorm, Mindbreak Trap, or Rhystic Study. So one big change from the standard Najeela list is that you look down here and there's no ad nauseum. This is a quote fast Najeela list, but one meant to once again prey on those mid-range decks. And I think this is a very, very cool move to see Memo adjusting for the meta game accordingly, right? Like we're seeing this Rhystic Mystic meta game, and playing around that meta is a very, very smart choice, right? We still have all of our 1-card win cons. We have Derevi, we have Grim Hireling, all that good stuff. I don't remember if there's any. Oh yeah, we have Druid's Repository as the enchantment version of one of those effects, which I think is great to be picking this guy back up again, especially once again in that grindier combat-focused mid-range meta, right? Like sometimes you just need to resolve that one spell when you have a Najeela attack or two, and boom, you're off to the races. We have War Leader's Call here, which was new hot tech from Murders of Karlov Manor. Very, very solid with Nagila. All of your warriors being 2/2s right off the bat. Every time they come in, they're impact tremorings people by dealing 1 damage to them, right? So like a couple combats in, you're doing a lot of damage to the table. Not to mention Nagila herself being a 4/3, able to punch through Timnas and Ragavans and Kinans and all of those cards that we know so well. So definitely a big adjustment. I mean, 30 lands in this deck says so much about how different this list is from when it used to be. A lot of stuff here. I love seeing the Bring Delight tech. I think that's really clever. I like that they're also still on Underworld Breach lines, right? Like I can have this. Oh no, they're not on Underworld Breach lines. I literally just spoke too soon. Whoa. I was like, oh yeah, Savines is here. They're definitely on breach lines. No. So very much different from the old way of playing this deck. Still on Thoracle Consult lines, right? Definitely don't want to give up this sort of just free thing you get for being a 5-color, right? But Spellskite here to protect your creatures, Kutzel and Grand Abolisher to protect your wins. We've got the Devilish Valet, which is such a cool piece of tech. Just literally a hasty warrior for the deck that immediately, you know, as soon as you go to combat with just Nagila and the Valet, it's getting buffed for considerable amount. So it gets, yeah, double, right? So if you have Nagila out, you play Valet, you swing in, at minimum with those 2 alone, you're having it go up to 4 power, right? And that's just in the literal smallest case scenario, right? There are times where this can get out of hand, be like 30, 40, 60, never 40, but 30, 60 power, right? Which is obviously quite strong. We have Chatterfang in here also, very classic mid-range Nagila plan. You just double the amount of things that attack. Now, obviously, Chatterfang itself is a warrior. That's great. The squirrels are not, so they don't double Nagila next turn. But I mean, Chatterfang itself being an evasive attacker, that's also removal on a stick. All pretty solid. We have a Bramblewood Paragon here, very much ready to just push the aggro plan in this deck. Very cool. I love seeing the innovation here from Memo. It's really, really solid, and you know, you get to be this interactive, responsible deck while also playing 5-color good stuff, not feeding into Rhystic Study, still playing aggro cards here like Final Fortune, Chance for Glory, really pushing that combat win con here and keeping your Thoracle Consult lines for all of that kind of stuff. This is a really cool innovation here by Memo. And I'm glad that, you know, some of the stuff we've been talking about in the Nagila sphere is coming to light. It's really cool to see the list being innovated and worked upon and not just sort of jamming the same thing over and over again in a way that was unsuccessful. So clearly very cool adaptation for Nagila, and very excited to see Memo do well with this new version of the list. Max B MTG here with Blueberry Pie. Max, known as a Florian and Talion player, and has done pretty well in a couple of these platinum events, making top 16 with Talion pretty frequently. I don't think any top 4s with this list yet, but definitely top 16ing a decent amount. Showing up, making Talion work, right? This is the Talion list, very similar to the one that they brought to the Boil. A very solid Talion control deck, right? The entire idea is to basically grind the game to a halt with Talion on your opponent's side of things, and just slowly attrition, grab some value over and over again, and be the control deck of cEDH, eventually winning with things like Thoracle Consult, but more realistically, just grinding your opponents out, you know, winning with things like Sheoldred, having double Talions out there, occasionally going for the Hullbreaker Horror lines where you can bounce Bowmasters over and over again. You can bounce your One Ring to draw your entire deck, and then eventually bounce Bowmasters over and over again. It's a deck that's not meant to be played by those who are impatient. It's a control deck through and through, and definitely the results show that for sure. And it's really cool to see this deck and see the iterations of it, see which pieces of interaction are being used by these pilots, see which like sort of atypical pieces are ready to attack the format. Talion's a really cool commander, and I like that it's definitely getting at least 1 or 2 champions who are willing to keep pushing this deck and keep going for those wins. So congrats to Max on the top cut with this cool deck. We have Rocketman here with Tim McCraw. This is a blue farm list. Rocketman is definitely known for playing blue farm, definitely has played some Rogsai in his days as well. Actually recently played him at the 95 event that I went to a couple weeks ago that I did the tournament report with Tim to Malcolm. This is a pretty grindy Tim McCraw list. Really cool to see Trouble in Pairs and Smothering Tithe in this list. I'd kind of mentioned that Trouble in Pairs seems really strong in Blue Farm to some friends recently, and I was like, I just don't know if you have room for it, but it's cool to see one of these versions of the deck playing it. Necropotence in here, very enchantment heavy Blue Farm list here, very back to the traditional 14 artifacts. Now the next 3 decks I'm going to talk about in a row are all Blue Farm lists, but then this is the sort of end of Blue Farm's road after we get done talking about these 3 lists, but definitely going to be pointing out the highlights of each of these lists, right? So for me, when I look at this version of the deck, what sets it apart from the other blue farms that I traditionally look at is the enchantment package, right? The fact that it's on Necro with Born and Final Fortune lines, and also, you know, on a lot of these good value enchantments. Rocket Man's done pretty consistently well with blue farm, as I mentioned, over the years, and it's good to see him doing so again. So congrats on the top 16. I also love seeing the Sarah Ascendant. I love, whenever I play Blue Farm, I'm really happy about Sarah Ascendant's inclusion, so I'm glad it's not just me. We have Good Soup by Freedom Waffle. This is Freedom's, you know, pretty standard blue farm list that he's been rocking for quite some time. This is sort of just his thing at this point, taking one of the best decks in the format and doing pretty consistently well with it. I haven't seen many crazy adaptations. You know, first thing I'm doing is going down here, checking enchantments, where, yeah, I think he was one of the first people I saw pretty frequently playing Smothering Tithe. At the Boil, he was playing 31 Instants, just like this one. So seeming very similar to the one that he top 4'd the Boil with when we played in that finals match. Very similar stuff here, no longer on Boromir, which was like his old thing back in the day. Very much classic interaction suite here with just enough to be like, all right, here are my advantage engines in the deck, and then a lot of the rest of it is just interaction and stuff that pushes the win when eventually his opponents slip up and give him the opportunity. We got Authorical Lines, Adnaz, Consult, Underworld Breach, all that stuff. So congrats to Freedom for the top 16. I have no idea how to interpret the name of this deck list, but I'm gonna say it anyways. This is Twang, also known as Jorman, with the same wind, blows on us all. I'm not weird, just different. This is this is a blue farm list that Jorman is very well known for playing. You will recognize Jorman's name as a very frequent pilot here on blue farm. Very much a pilot who is known for playing this deck. This is kind of his tournament deck. He occasionally plays Kinan, but this is his thing more often than not. You know, going through his list here, we can go down and see not on the Necro lines, which I'm pretty sure he was on during the Boil. And very similar to Freedom in the fact that he's got the 31 instants in here. He's on Angel's Grace in his version, which he's been pretty consistently on for quite some time, on Path and Sword, so definitely heavier on the creature removal than some other blue farm lists that I'm used to seeing. A few more creatures here than in Freedom's list as well, just two more value engines in this variant as well. And that's about it. I mean, it's a pretty standard list. He's been rocking it for a long time. It's very consistent in his hands, and it makes sense that he's going to consistently do well with this deck. So congrats, Jorman, on another top 16. We have Deadly Blade 7 here with Sase, Captain of Amogus. I feel like I've said that name before. This is a Sase deck. It is very classic Sase tutor chains. I think there are more Sases in this tournament showing up. Sase did very, very well and had a very solid representation, just like Blue Farm did. But the difference is Sase was a little bit higher up on folks who made top 4s and things like that. So Sase had a very good tournament. It's been, you know, creeping up as far as representation in the format. When everybody's locking down boards with heuristic studies and stuff like that, turns out the deck that can literally execute a win without casting a single spell is going to be doing really well. The deck is performing really, really well. Once again, a deck that can attack the metagame in which, you know, everyone's trying to lock up boards and you know, send things like Heuristic Study into being the most definitive cards. Turns out when you can win through those things without having to feed them a bunch of cards, it, you know, narrows the window of opportunity. As many know, I'm very high on Sase. I was able to just recently win a tournament with it. Deck's super solid, and I think we're going to be seeing a decent amount of it. Wounded Satellite here with his Kinan deck. He was debating whether he played Talion or Kinan very much until the last minute of this tournament. We were talking about it right before we got into this. Here, playing Kinan, doing pretty solid with it. Lost in top 16, but still showing up and performing well with this deck. Actually, the person I lost to that bumped me out of contention for the top 16. So that was definitely pretty tough on that one. But yeah, this is his pretty standard Kinan list at this point. I'm pretty sure he just even used his primer list, so no major changes from sort of the Kinan stuff we've been seeing from him for a long time. If I go down here to like the recent history of the deck, I feel like it's a lot of stuff in the sideboard and things like that that have been moving around, but not a ton of stuff. Yeah, 6 months ago was the last time this deck changed. So yeah, it's literally the same list that he's played in several reports that we've already covered, including the Boil, where we played in the top 4. So yeah, I mean, Kinan still very, very solid deck, definitely receiving a lot more hate than it used to, but Wounded was able to take it and do very, very well with it. I'm pretty sure he's the only Kinan player that topped though, and actually I'm actually curious about this as we go through the tournament because we're back up here. So here's the top 16. We don't really see another Kinan for a really long time. So, you know, yeah, 50th place was the next highest Kinan, I think, unless I missed any, which is really, really indicative to me of the fact that Kenon was not very well placed for this tournament. So well done on making that top cut when the deck itself is looking like a pretty bad spot. I think that also goes to show which like myself and a bunch of other pilots have been saying for quite some time, which is Kenon is a deck that will do well. It will do very well in someone's hands who's learning and like picking up the format, but it will do exceptionally well in the hands of someone who is very confident with the list and able to really master the list. So it's a deck that definitely has a lot of a very high ceiling, but there's definitely a lot of gap between the floor of the deck and the ceiling of the deck. And you know, we're starting to see it in tournaments like this one, which the deck is not doing fantastically overall, but a very confident pilot is able to at least make top cut with it. We have Zane here with Grixis AGI. This is a pretty classic showing from Zane. It was tough to see. He did really well during the Swiss and unfortunately lost in top 16. So, you know, a very good run that unfortunately did not end with him making that that final pod or taking the whole thing down. But Zane, often the pilot I point to when I get asked anything about Rogsai. Very confident pilot, very competent pilot, and someone who knows how to pilot Rogsai extremely well, as the results from this tournament showed. Very solid player for sure. And you know, including some new stuff. We were talking about it a little bit as the tournament is wrapping up. They're on Talion now, which is pretty cool adaptation to the meta game. As you know, we mentioned Rogsai can struggle a little bit when things get a little too mid-rangey, and it's a nice way for the deck to sort of plant and rebuild. I believe in Zane's own words, you know, he said something along the lines of, I can only see a 4-mana Rhystic Study being so bad, so we tried it out for this one, which clearly it maybe at least helped a little bit to have another copy of that effect in here. I think we're seeing that Conquer Slow and Defense Grid is starting to become the standardized Rogsai tech here. But yeah, apart from that, Rogsai doing very quick Rogsai things. For those who don't know, it is the fastest Turbo Nas deck in the format, and very confident pilots can pilot to execute wins at a blistering pace. So congrats to Zane on taking this deck and doing very well with it, especially in the Swiss, and then still making top cut. Just want to remind y'all that we do coaching here at Community MTG. If you're interested in cEDH coaching, I'm spending a lot of time right now in my downtime being able to organize the Discord, organizing my gameplay servers. I added some new stuff in there as well as working on a number of different ways in which we can improve coaching and show different breakdowns, stuff like that for folks out there. You know, for those who get confused sometimes, coaching is not just for people who want to sign up through the Patreon. I do independent sessions outside of the Patreon for those who are interested. You can find my email, comedianmtg@gmail.com. You can also find me on Discord and Twitter, which are down below in this description. But it's been really awesome. I've had a number of my clients do pretty well lately and take down a number of tournaments, especially the folks who are like out there doing like their 64-person tournaments that are like around. I'm actually gonna be doing a full coaching breakdown video a little bit later in the month, if not multiple pieces on it. Not the current moment, because as I mentioned earlier in the video, I'm doing a little bit of traveling right now to go to LA to shoot some Scrybaby stuff and do some other cool stuff in the next few weeks, as well as go to Command Fest Dallas, which is gonna be pretty fun. Yeah, but details about coaching you'll find in the description in this video. I've had a very happy and long career. You know, I just missed the bubble out on this tournament here, which does happen, but I have a resume that very much can be used to help folks, and you know, teaching others how to be successful at cEDH, something I'm really proud of. Whether you are just getting into the format, trying to learn the fundamentals, or whether you are trying to take that next step and turn yourself into someone who attends these things more regularly and does well at your local scene, picking up the fundamentals, or whether you want to be finding yourself converting over to a grinder of sorts, feel free to reach out to me at any of those places and we can set something up. We have two Dios here with cEBS. This is another Sisei list. So this was Dio, actually played him in the Swiss of this tournament. We ended up drawing, as you can tell by a number of my rounds for this tournament. But this is a pretty classic Sisei Tutor Chains list. The big difference you'll notice from the one we covered earlier is that he is on the Cultist of the Absolute and Chromatic Orrery lines with Dihada up here in the Planeswalker suite. So definitely a specific choice for that version of this list. Also, interesting to see Drana and Lenvala out here, which is a card that was kind of popular when it first came out in Sisei, but really hasn't seen as much play in recent history. So pretty cool to see it making this top 4 and in this Sisei list. Apart from that, you're seeing the regular like Tutor Chains lines here with the Amanatu, Nicol Bolas, Oath of Teferi stuff, but also having the Chromatic Orrery and Explosive Lines come in with that, and Cultist of the Absolute. So pretty solid cEDH list here. Very cool to see it doing well. Congrats to you on that one. We have Taria East here with Oath of cEDH. Taria East, also the player who was able to win the SCG that I took the Master Transcendent to. So definitely a well-known cEDH pilot, doing some cool spicy stuff here with like things like Gage Rumpihada, which you saw for a while Malcolm was testing in his list. He is on K9 in this version of the deck, which I didn't think many other folks were on. Some interesting inclusions here for sure. Definitely on some cultist line. Actually did play against this player as well. Unfortunately, it was in my round 5 when I mulliganed to 2. So I can't really say that I contributed a ton to that game, but you know, it was definitely a solid match, and it's always good to play with him. We have Loran here in the 99, which I know some players are really hot on, some players are pretty low on, but it's cool to have that sort of tutorable artifact or enchantment removal. Also, if it has haste, it's sort of like anti-Thoracle tech, because you can always make your opponents draw a card in response to their Thassa's Oracle trigger on the stack. Definitely interesting to see them playing Neoform and not Eldritch Evolution in this version of the deck for sure. But yeah, this deck is pretty solid. I think, you know, cEDH is a really solid deck in a really solid position right now. And Taria East has been doing pretty well with the list as of late, so congrats to our pilot here for that performance. We have Mad King with Corvold Mad King, and pretty cool to see our pilot here with a couple results from this version of the deck. Corvold is a deck that I feel like not a lot of people are really high on, and also kind of got a bad rap during the cheating scandal with one of the successful pilots earlier in the year. So it's cool to see a Corvold list doing pretty well in this tournament. You know, Corvold is one of the fastest decks in the format, very, very solid, one of the best Dockside decks next to cEDH in the format, and definitely very explosive and very, very powerful. Corvold is a really cool deck. I think it's gotten some new tools lately, although I'm not seeing too many crazy adaptations from, you know, some pilots were really excited about the use of junk tokens, but it doesn't seem like that is an adaptation made here for this variant of the deck. For those who don't know, you're basically just trying to crack treasures while Corvold's on the battlefield, and everything else from there just turns into gravy. Interesting to see Peer into the Abyss in this version too. I feel like that's not a card traditionally played in Corvold, but definitely one that is played a decent amount. We also have the cool Corpse Dance lines. Basically, if you get Dockside and some sack outlets, so Skirk Prospector specifically in this version of the deck, and I guess you could do this with Mayhem Devil as well, but if you make enough treasures, you can cast the buyback part of Corpse Dance to reanimate a Dockside in the yard, and either through a sack outlet or by shooting it with your Mayhem Devil triggers, you can put it back in the graveyard and then just make a loop where you infinitely either ping your opponents down with a Mayhem Devil or just make infinite treasures, play Corvold, and draw your deck. So pretty cool stuff here from our pilot. As I mentioned, Corvold has been a deck that a lot of people love. It's a passion project for a lot of folks, and it's been cool to see it sort of bounce back from the bad reputation it got during that sort of scandal period with the deck. So that's pretty cool. We have Rogsai here by MTGPT. This is our winner and the first Rogsai win of a tournament of this size, I believe, which is, you know, really big for that deck. You know, a lot of the times the conversation usually goes with like, hey, Rogsai does really, really well at qualifying, at making the top 16, but usually struggles in those top 16 pods and struggles to sort of take the win there, right? I do find it kind of interesting that it was able to do well in the pod that it did, right? Like if you look at the finals pod, which is like Corvold, double cEDH, seems like a really solid pod for Rogsai. And I know like if I was Tad, I would be pretty excited about this performance, but seriously, to be able to take down an entire tournament with Rogsai is not an easy feat. It is a very obviously powerful and explosive deck. There's actually some cool, interesting stuff here in the mana base of the deck that really caught me off guard. First of all, they're down to 23 lands, which is just like the Rogsai no land meme keeps getting better. Not that it's a meme in a negative way, but it's just, it's funny. But also they're on Undercity Sewers, which is really interesting because I haven't seen many lists on Surveil lands. And the fact that not only is a list on Surveil lands in cEDH, but the fastest list in the format is on a tap land was something that really, really caught me off guard. So I found that kind of fascinating. And I'd be curious to hear from our main pilot, Thad here, if that ended up being something that was like really detrimental or if it ended up being a really cool inclusion for the deck, which I find pretty fascinating. So Apart from that, pretty standard Rogsai stuff, right? We talk about this very explosive Mana Rock package, right? You're trying to be the fastest deck in the format. You're trying to push really quick ad nos lines, really quick breach lines, and be able to push your advantage as much as possible. No Talion in this version of the deck, so this is much more low to the ground, as you can probably tell by the 23 lands in this version. So where, you know, Z-Rob's list tended to be a little bit more in the realm of having a few backup engines, this one's definitely a little bit more pushed towards the aggressive side of the deck. So congrats to our champion for the first platinum event takedown with the Rogsai deck. It's really cool to see it finally happen, and there's a lot of supporters of the deck. So it's good to see, because it's been having really good numbers these past couple of months, but once again, just that conversion to actually top 4 or winning a tournament has not really happened. So very cool to see our player here take the whole thing down. Congrats, MTGPT. This was a fascinating tournament. There was a lot of really interesting dialogue that kind of came up during this tournament, where I personally was seeing a lot of draws and a lot of grindy games. You know, I was hearing a lot of really interesting conversations from players about things that they were seeing, because, you know, a lot of folks do want to come up and like talk about their matches after the round. So, you know, I did hear that there was some interesting stuff, especially around like mistrust, right? There's a lot of folks who are, you know, not really ready to like believe other players, right? And work in sort of that political space in the format. And I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, some of the lying scandals and stuff like that that have happened in the tournaments recently, right? Which is like, you know, it was bound to be an evolution of the format that became a problem. And I think we're seeing a lot of overreaction from that thing. But I'm also hearing some players that I didn't think would engage in that stuff, just like bold-faced lying to other players as well. So, you know, it's definitely interesting to see sort of that stuff evolving. You know, I don't want to like throw names out there, one, because like I'm being told how players acted in interactions by other players, right? So like people can exaggerate. You know, I'm only present for as many games as I can sit there and play, but it's really fascinating to see. I was very fascinated to see that like I wasn't in pods that were like triggering Crom a lot, because up until this point, I found Crom to be really, really successful in the format. So the fact that I was in these like grindy, very Sisei heavy games, to be fair, tournaments and stuff like that. There's a lot of fascinating stuff from this tournament. I could probably go on and on about my observations from this event for another hour, right? But I don't want to keep you all here hostage for that as much. But it was a fascinating tournament. Definitely feel like the Punt City meta is always just like a little bit different than some of the other metas. I feel like it's a little bit more proactive, as you can see, obviously, by double Rogsai making the top cut of that tournament. But it's very fascinating to see and super interesting. I definitely still had an amazing time. You know, it's tough to bubble out for my first event in quite some time, not making the top cut. But on the other hand, I'm very proud of my results up to this date as well. So, you know, it is how it is, and there's always next time. At the end of the day, walked away with only 2 losses in the tournament, but didn't make it on this one. And very cool to see the different lists that were around. As I said, some really fascinating dialogue about the stuff that was present in these tournaments, whether it be players who were playing in ways that were kind of unconventional, or, you know, some of the fascinating stuff around all of the things that are currently evolving in the format. You know, there's some interesting lists if you go past the top 16 of the deck, but definitely the tournament was very much a one where you could predict a decent amount of the decks that you're going to see for it as well. So that was kind of fascinating to see. I'm curious what you all think. What were y'all thoughts on some of these top 16 decks here? Were there any things that surprised you? Obviously, we definitely had to highlight the super cool Zurgo Ojutai deck, which, you know, all of these deck lists are in the description down below this video, but I'm curious to hear y'all thoughts. Let me know in the comments down below. And congrats to all of our pilots for doing really, really well. We had, you know, seriously, for MTGPT for making the first Rogsai Platinum win, which is pretty big for the deck, you know, something that it usually struggles with. For a lot of our players, for Zane for doing really well in the Swiss, Memo innovating on the Gila and taking a list that he's known for and just really flipping it on top of its head. There's a lot of really cool stuff that happened in this tournament and a lot of good players doing really, really well. So let me know what y'all think in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.